This is the GARIS Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 390, part 2, entitled Monoconscious Media Bias. Carrying straight on. Thus the time is coming when a growing number of masculists will start feeling antsy that producing masculist videos to get the masculist ball rolling is not enough. Masculist theory has already crystallized enough that the time is now ripe to take these masculist ideas to the journalists, so that journalists can be influenced by them, so that large numbers of male journalists can be converted to the masculist religion, so that they have their masculist consciousnesses raised, so that they are able to see the massive gender political injustices that are committed against men on a daily basis in their millions of examples across the world. So how to approach the journalists, the media people, especially when these media people are now mostly women, since journalists, TV producers, etc. are now mostly women. The masculist fight for the legislation of the para, for example, will profoundly threaten women because it will force women to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives, and that prospect terrifies most women who have been brought up on the idea that some white knight, some gullible manslave, will solve their existential fears of starving while having responsibility for the survival of some child and not having financial support from some male in the background who passes dollars into her hand. Women evolved to be strong solipsists, that is, self-centered, looking out largely for her own existence, seeing men as cash machines to pay for women. The para will cause profound changes in society, forcing women to grow up, to become fips, to educate their daughters to be fips, or be spat at by a masculisted society, as is likely in the coming decades. How to overcome decades-long pro-feminist brainwashing in the minds of the journalists, who will hear the complaints of the masculists as just more misandry, especially as seen by the feminist journalists who know nothing about masculism. So how do the masculists get a foot in the door when approaching the journalists and media people, trying to persuade them to start taking up the masculist story and bring it to the masses, the millions, so that the masculist snowball can really start rolling, so that millions of men can have their lives liberated from man's slavery to the hated, bloody, fluffy parasites and from the hated, fluffy feminist hypocrites who control the divorce courts. I ask myself this question often, since it presses down on me heavily. I, and many other masculists, feel the time is ripe to push the media about how, what to do. Of course, we can continue to make our masculist videos and put them up for the world to see. Personally, I get about 300 views on my BitChute masculist videos a day, and 0 on my YouTube masculist videos. Because the CEO of YouTube is a real feminazi hypocrite who fosters feminist videos and terminates whole masculists and MGTOW, that's men going their own way, channels, thus earning the hatred of masculists and MGTOWs for her blatant sexist hypocrisy with her attitude of, "It's okay for women, for feminists, to lash out at men for the way that men oppress women, but it's not okay for men, for masculists, to lash out at women for the way that women oppress men." This attitude of many monoconscious women merely reinforces the hatred that masculists have towards such women for its obvious, at least the masculists, sexist, two-faced hypocrisy. It's what is good for the goose is not good for the gander. But monoconscious feministed women dominate the media nowadays, and the male journalists who are younger and probably more open to being influenced by masculist ideas are under the career thumb of these older feministed monoconscious females, so dare not rock the feminist boat through fear of being fired, losing their jobs by being seen by these feministed female media bosses as male chauvinists, misogynists, complaining against women, etc. You see the problem. There's a real monoconscious media bias against masculism that only makes the masculists all the angrier and hateful. There's a limit to the patience and tolerance of masculists. If the current media bias against masculism continues, then there will eventually be a sex war, since the massive injustice committed by women against men cannot continue. Men will snap and turn murderous, militarily murderous, killing large numbers of people in a sex war. So concretely, what can masculists do to get the masculist media campaign off the ground, besides continuing to make masculist and MGTOW videos? One obvious answer is to approach the media people, starting with the males, appealing to their self-interest. Many of these younger male journalists are married, so run the risk of being among the 1 in 4 fathers who get financially crucified and has his life ruined in the hated, fluffy feminist-dominated divorce court system. So, one masculist suggestion is to take masculist ideas to the younger male journalists and try to get the masculist media snowball rolling that way. Other suggestions might be send out media packages with masculist ideas in paper or electronic form to prominent media people, inviting them to launch the biggest gender political story they have heard of in half a century, that is, the story of the other half of the population, the male half, to introduce the largest social change since the early days of feminism and its push for the vote for women. The fight for the para is likely to prove to be as major a social political challenge for men as was the push for the right to vote for women, which took decades of effort and sweat by the suffragettes, which they eventually won. The fight for the para will probably be just as much an uphill struggle, since it will so profoundly change society, rewriting the gender rules, fundamentally changing the way men and women conceive of themselves. The para, and masculism in general, will force women, especially feminists, to become bi-conscious feminists, learning that gender oppression is a two-way street, and that if they continue in their monoconscious attitudes, then not only will men hate them, especially the masculists, but women will also increasingly hate them, as masculists tell young women that the main reason that young women can't persuade quality men, whom they strongly want to mate with, to have superior kids, refuse to give them their sperm, is that these quality men utterly reject taking the risk of marriage and paternity in a divorce court system that has been taken over by the hated fluffy feminist hypocrites who see men, fluffy feminist style, as cash machines to be robbed and abused. Young women wanting desperately to have babies will be taught by these masculists that to motivate men to be willing to be fathers again, these young women will need to vote with men for the men fairing of the gender laws, so that the necessary divorce law reforms and the legislation of the para take place. When both sexes learn to hate the monoconscious feminazi bigots, that is, MFBs, then these MFBs will die out, as young women see the writing on the wall that monoconscious feminists are being crushed by the bi-conscious feminists and by a steadily growing masculisted society as masculist ideas spread. But as the masculists so bitterly complain, we are not there yet. We are not yet at the position where masculist ideas are widely spread enough so that young women can be taught by masculists to hate the MFBs, who are indirectly preventing young women from getting sperm from the quality men they desperately want to mate with. What else can masculists do to spread awareness of masculist ideas? Since I'm a retired prof, I frequent my local university, where I can sprout masculist ideas to the audience in talks that are on gender political themes. The problem with such talks and venues is that they are heavily, and I mean heavily, monoconscious biased, strongly so. I know from experience that if I start talking masculist ideas in such talks, there will be massive intolerance coming from these MFBs towards masculist thinking. So masculists will just have to bite the bullet and harangue back, and with greater masculist verbal violence, telling these MFBs that they are indirectly wiping out whole populations due to their control of the divorce courts, causing 2/3 of young men in many countries to reject marriage and paternity. So these MFBs have to be stopped with bullets if necessary in a sex war. Hopefully, after enough times, there will be journalists and media people in the audience who have enough common sense to really listen to what these masculists in the audience are saying and sense that there is a real gender political story here that needs to be given a real airing. What is needed is to give the masculist snowball a real kick and in the right direction, that is downhill, so that it can pick up real momentum, so that in time it becomes a massive thundering force that will change society, causing millions of men to be liberated from manslavery, forcing millions of women to flip up and stop manslaving men, so that everyone can become bi-conscious and hence more open to the gender political complaints of both sexes. In today's world, 2020, this is far from being the case. We still live in a highly monoconscious world, especially with the media, who have a profound monoconscious media bias in favour of women and know nothing about masculist ideas, who are callous towards men's issues, which only make the masculists hate them all the more. Things cannot continue like this. Such a continuation is a recipe for war, a sex war, in which thousands of MFBs are killed in the streets, thousands of fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges are murdered and the like. It is in the self-interest of monoconscious feminists to become bi-conscious, that is, become as familiar with masculist ideas as feminist ideas, so that the risk of them being killed in a sex war is reduced, and better still, they will be much more likely to have boyfriends, since bi-conscious women are much less feminazi bitchy, since they have their feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women, countered by their masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Men find monoconscious feminazis repulsive and punish them by totally avoiding them, not even pumping and dumping them, thus forcing them to rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless and hated. Bi-conscious feminists are thus much more approachable by men and hence are much more likely to have boyfriends and hence be loved and sexed. But until the divorce laws and the para are reformed and legislated, they will not be given babies, since only fools and ignorant men marry and have kids nowadays, given that the odds of being massacred in the fluffy feminist-dominated divorce courts is now 1 in 4 for married fathers. There's so much to do for the masculists. The theory has pretty well crystalized. The masculist ideas are now out there. The time is now right to spread them far and wide so that whole populations, billions of people, can be influenced by them. But that needs their take-up by the media people. But the media people are monoconsciously biased, so that bias needs to be overcome. So masculists, roll up your sleeves, spit in your hands, and go out there and fight. Force the monoconscious media people to listen to the ideas of the masculists. Threaten them, harangue them, frighten them, persuade them, convince them, convert them, enlighten them, and finally ennoble them. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man-Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 390 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses. Freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.